Hi, everybody, and welcome. Welcome to this week's webinar, where we will be focusing on breaking down the barriers to high velocity procurement. My name is Ian Lawless. I'm Event Director here at Procurement Leaders. This is the first of 3 webinars across the course of this year, where we're going to be addressing Procurement Leaders' annual theme of total procurement, where speed is one of our key 3 pillars. We're going to go into a bit more detail around that from our panel shortly, but I'm delighted to be joined today by David Ray, Chief Product Officer at Procurement Leaders, and Jason Humphrey, Global Commercial Lead, B2B Marketplace at TradeShift, who we are also delighted to have partnering with us on this particular research report for this year. Jason, I'd love to come to you first. Just a little introduction from yourself, just to the audience today before we get cracking on more of the content.
Thanks, Ian. I'm excited to work with you and David today and the audience as well. So my role here at TradeShift is I've been here for about 5 years, and I'm the global commercial lead for our marketplaces business unit. My background is in e-commerce and marketplaces for over 15 years now. Worked with a lot of large brands from Amazon, Walmart, Best Buy, and many others. And joining now with TradeShift, the B2B and procurement space to drive innovations from our business to consumer kind of world, which is very fast moving, right? And bringing that into the B2B space. So excited to be here. It's a perfect topic for it.
Perfect. Yeah, and as we think about high velocity procurement and some of the barriers around it and your experience that you'll be able to bring to it, a great person to have on this conversation with us today, David. Our community will be more familiar with you, David, from as Chief Product Officer of PL. But for those who haven't had the pleasure of joining on these conversations before, just a quick overview from you, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. So my apologies for being on many of these types of sessions, but I'm David. I'm Chief Product Officer at Procurement Leaders. Been with the business for about 15 years now, and lead all of the different areas of the product of Procurement Leaders, and that includes the research that we produce, the events that we put on around the globe, and also the collaboration opportunities as well. So really great to be here. Fascinating topic, which we'll get into very shortly. But yeah, thanks, Ian.
No, thank you very much indeed. If anybody did join that first webinar 15 years ago, I'd love to see the footage, but there we go. Maybe another time. We'll dive into the content now. I think maybe just a little bit of scene setting, perhaps from my perspective, just before we get into it. When we think about speed, it's a byproduct that, for procurement function that's truly aligned with the business. It can really flex its parameters to change, and we can analyze and make decisions efficiently as a result of having greater speed, be that through sourcing or for buying or for supplier diligence. And the interconnected nature, I think, of procurement, including people, including processes, and that lack of insight make high velocity difficult sometimes. So we're going to be discussing most recent research findings and some of the highlights, looking at those barriers, how we can overcome them. And that's going to be the focus of the next kind of half an hour of our conversation before we go into some of the questions that you've all provided us today. So more of that, and thank you for those in advance, for those of you that submitted those for this particular conversation. So David, let's get stuck into it. I think I referenced earlier that speed is one of the 3 pillars that we're focusing on this year as part of the total procurement theme that Procurement Leaders is looking at. Could you set the scene a little bit further forwards around this total procurement theme and the other areas that we're also looking at?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Ian. I mean, we've coined this phrase total procurement, and did so sort of towards the back end of last year, in acknowledging that really the purview of the function and what the community does is creeping into every area of the business now. And with the visibility that we have, being in the middle of the value chain, you get to see the upstream and you get to engage with the upstream, and then you get to really work with the downstream as well, and all the internal stakeholders. So it's a real 360-degree purview that the function has. But with that becomes a challenge, and how do you really bring the value that you can with the resources that you've got at your fingertips. But for the purpose of 2023, we chose to really dig into 3 areas that we felt were cropping up as being more and more important for the function. And the first is purpose. The third is transparency, but the one we're going to be talking about today and really digging into is this concept of speed, and how procurement needs to evolve and remove friction and latency from the process, and really to help connect those dots, and by doing so, bring greater value into the organization. And to do that, speed is the real sort of like crux of the issue. So it's a fascinating research project, excuse me, and some of the highlights here, and some of the well, we'll get into the highlights and some of the, you know, the reasoning for doing it. You know, I said that we're looking to really explore how and why latency and friction is introduced into the procurement process, and what that means. But also really looking at the business case for it, right? So why does speed matter, and what are the benefits of that? And then obviously exploring some of the inhibitors to greater speed, and some of the bottlenecks, and then eventually and fundamentally really how we can overcome some of those barriers and inhibitors to really sort of like work on that that speed aspect of the procurement process. So it's been a fascinating process, fascinating project so far. Had a lot of feedback from the community. We've conducted a lot of interviews as well as part of that, and that's really helping to bring forth a lot of insight. So I'll just share briefly, and there'll be no surprises here really, but some of the cases and some of the business cases for introducing greater velocity. And velocity is an important word, because velocity is differentiated from speed because it's pace in a particular direction. So, and that's key to this, you know, it's just random speed is not the answer. It needs to be purposeful speed, and introducing greater speed for a reason. But some of these areas here are important. So in the age of black swans, you know, real-time data can help teams to identify and mitigate risks before they have an impact. So that resilience pillar is an extremely important one. Companies that track inventory and sales trends in a very timely manner are much better placed to respond to unexpected changes as well. So demand planning is extremely important. Using technology to speed up or automate labor-intensive, maybe low-value tasks obviously has an efficiency and productivity gain. And being more closely connected to business needs and supplier capabilities, getting information through fast will help teams to foster greater innovation. And then you've got the obvious speed to market. You know, time certainly matters if you're working on a project, and you can get that out quicker. And you know, start the revenues rolling at an earlier date. So lots of business cases, and this is you know, 5 among many. But Jason, maybe, you know, just a thought from you in terms of some of the business benefits and cases you see around pace and speed and procurement.
Thanks, David. Yeah, you know, I think of resilience, right? That's something that we're hearing a lot about, especially coming out of the pandemic era we've recently lived in. You know, and things that come to mind are like digital connectivity, transparency, you know, and the right type of partnerships are really leading to more resilience, and really kind of built around digital connectivity. You know, another two here, that innovation and speed to market, at least in my mind, go kind of hand to hand. Obviously, it depends on the use case, right? But we're seeing new models being born, right? As companies are pivoting as a result of, you know, just rapid change. And, you know, for example, in procurement, a lot of questions I hear are like, how can we go from being just a cost center to maybe a revenue driver or a profit center, right? So, you know, a lot there being driven by speed.
Without a doubt. Thanks for sharing. I think as you walk through some of this, then David, perhaps a nice opportunity for us now just to talk. We said this is going to be quite a practical conversation, as well as we talk about some of the bottlenecks, some of the challenges, as we head through to solutions and some best use cases throughout the course of the conversation. But there's some interesting findings, David, from a bottlenecks perspective that we'd love just to get a little bit more insight on from what you can see in the chart here. Can you dive into that for us a little bit more?
Yeah, for sure. And, you know, some of these aspects of, you know, parts of the procurement process, there'll be no surprise at seeing some of the data points here. And I'll be interested to hear Jason's perspective as well, because they are so close to a lot of this and they're looking to solve a lot of these issues. But, you know, new supplier onboarding, and I'll share a story a little bit later about what one organization is doing. But 45, 50-day onboarding times on average, it's just a long time, right? And it's just, that's not helping. If you've got an opportunity in the market and you need new suppliers onboarded quickly to move quickly, then that's just not appropriate. Contracting, another respondent to the research that we did is, talks about the 15 different types of stakeholder that need to review and counter review, and it goes round endlessly before a contract can be signed off. And that's no surprise because of the risk element that we're talking about here. But there are things that can be done to try and mitigate and reduce the time there. But those two, supplier onboarding, contracting, are significant sort of friction points within the process. And then everything else, I mean, what this tells us really is there's delay and friction everywhere, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done. But again, Jason, from your side, what jumps out at you?
Yeah, I mean, certainly no surprise with those top two, right? Seller onboarding, contracting. I think they're, even on our network, we're seeing, about 35% of a company's suppliers are changing out annually, right? So you not only have the delays of seller onboarding, kind of across the industry that's challenging, but also, a high frequency of change that's happening too, which increases cost and delays downstream. I just think about, it's human behavior, right? At this point, when you're onboarding a new seller or you're sourcing new seller, you have to depend on human behavior, not just process, right? So that's going to cause delays, especially in the lower transaction volumes areas. But I look at the other, 5 other categories, and you're going to hear me talk a lot about marketplaces today. That is my area of expertise, but it's also a revolution that's happening in our space in B2B, and search, selection of sellers, development, category strategy, all of these things to me scream, it screams marketplaces, right? And I would, I think part of my thought coming out of this research is it affirms the need for a step change rather than just incremental, adaptations, right? So, not all categories of spend are going to work well for marketplace, but there are more and more categories that are becoming more and more applicable and accessible in different types of marketplaces. And I'm not just talking about Amazon Business, right? Amazon Business is a large, generalized marketplace, but I think the opportunity lies in new specialized marketplaces in different industries, different categories, different geographies that can solve a lot of these problems, right? And I think, in general, procurement is still doing too much, right? And with less staff oftentimes, right? And it's hard to be faster when you are spread thin, across trying to solve everything in every category. So, there's a future where outsourcing or partnering with certain specialized category-based marketplaces will absolutely solve things like supplier search and selection. Instead of having to go through the contracting timeline of someone in a maybe tactical spend category, working directly with a partner that's specializing in that area, right, can significantly increase your speed. So, more stats on that, which I can share throughout the deck here, but that's how I, kind of look at this slide.
Right. No, thank you. I mean, you touched on a couple of things there, actually. With regard to causes of delay, you actually touched on a couple of the points that are in there as well, from a staffing perspective, from a workload perspective as well. David, there's some interesting results kind of from this particular part of the research as we talk a bit more about those causes for delay. Can you just give us a bit of kind of what the key findings were on this aspect of the report?
Yeah, I mean, so I'll dig into some of the ones lower down the chart here, but the data and information gaps, far and away the biggest contributor to delay in the procurement process. Getting access to that data, making sure it's reliable, making sure it's fresh and clean, and regularly updated is a key bottleneck and a key challenge for the function. But I think I would challenge as well, capabilities, rigid operating models, organizational silos are also issues that we need to get past to bring greater speed. And part of that is also, you know, the culture of the organization and making decisions quickly, being allowed to make decisions, being able to, you know, work with people, you know, with a certain degree of autonomy and not having so many people involved in everything that needs to be decided. So, you know, some of these causes of delay, which were, you know, in the research says, you know, are still significant with, you know, around a third or greater, I think is a, you know, a real area of potential upside for procurement functions to work on. Jason, what do you think?
Yeah, so I'm just looking at org silos here. You know, something that really stands out to me is not only silos, which are very real. I think there's also internal conflict at times between organizations. And an example that comes to mind is, you know, for example, manufacturers that are, you know, have been selling through a traditional distribution channel, you know, throughout their lifetime, right? Now having to pivot based on, you know, changes in the industry, changes in the market, right? And now maybe they're selling direct to customer, you know, using online channels to sell direct, right? Immediately, you know, there's a challenge and a conflict between, say, a field sales team that's been, you know, earning their living a certain way for many years to, you know, an online team. And if it's not handled right, then it's not only silos, but it's now competition. And I've seen it fail, you know, a number of times. I've also seen it, you know, become wildly successful. And it really depends on, you know, communication from the top and other things. But, you know, organizational silos being the second one here, I find that interesting. And I just wanted to add that, you know, there can be competition that's happening internally if the communication is not there.
Yeah, for sure.
Good stuff. No, thank you both. Some of the information flow aspects that on the last slide kind of being some of the reasons and causes for delay. Insight versus timely insight, interesting concept. David, maybe talk to us a little bit more about some of the findings in here as we found it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the first thing to say here is that, you know, we lack both timely and adequate insight. The fact that we lack timely insight even more than adequate insight is potentially not surprising and, you know, a big problem. But the fact that that insight isn't there at all is, you know, really, you know, something we need to focus on. But, you know, some of these areas are, you know, hugely valuable if we were to get them right. So internal sales forecasting, you know, conversations I've had, you know, on the back of this research, you know, in terms of which is linked to inventory planning. You know, if there's a change in a customer order, it can take weeks, sometimes months for that information to come through and link with the actual supply market and the supply contracts. And, you know, and that's just not good enough, because before you know it, you've built up inventory, you know, you've built up inventory, and then the CFO is asking you know, why have we got all of this, you know, this unnecessary inventory sitting on the books when, you know, and, you know, a CPO needs to have a good answer for that, or not to have an answer because they've already seen it, you know, coming down. And traditional S&OP, so sales and operational planning, is not quick enough either. So we need to close gaps around those areas. But, you know, all sorts of things that we could dig into here. But, you know, that gap between having up to minute, you know, timely insight is really prevalent across every area here. Jason, your thoughts?
Yeah, so I might have a different perspective on this and maybe bring a little bit of hope, but there's a lot of change that's needed. You know, I come from business to consumer world where, you know, there are real-time APIs that are pretty much integrated in most areas of kind of a, you know, retail or any online buying experience. And it's driven by, you know, the consumer, millennial, Gen Z type consumers. But my point is the technology for solving some of these challenges for timely insight here on the left exists, right? The technology is displaying itself to exist in the B2C world. I mean, think of what is required to deliver same day, right? And many of, or all of us listening, experience the benefits of being able to order something online and then receive it the same day, depending where you live, right? Or on demand, manufacturing and delivery, right? These are incredible breakthroughs from a technology standpoint, and consumers are benefiting significantly. So the technology exists in many cases, right? It's that, in business to business, the way that things have worked, and certainly there's different levels of requirements and risk mitigation and all of that that's necessary. I'm not saying it's apples to apples comparison. What I'm saying is, things like inventory planning, supplier capacity, category pricing, there are APIs, there's technology that can bring this type of insight, but it's the industry that needs to adapt, right? And I think the adaptation is more of I'll call it a step change rather than incremental. And that's kind of a cry that I'm calling out in the areas that I'm speaking or writing, because incremental changes are not really delivering this insight, right, in a timely manner. If you look at the top bullet there on the right, adequate insight is there. I think of classic or traditional procurement tools, they're excellent, right? But they're purpose built and they've been around for, over 20 years. And while they are excellent and the quality is very high, we're seeing the need for timely insight, breaking those systems right now. So there's a need for, step change and bringing some of that technology into B2B and procurement.
So just a question, if I may. I mean, in your experience, that, the non-incremental, so kind of foundational shift, I mean, that's going to take significant investment, significant cross-functional stakeholder buy-in. It's going to have, so is that the challenge here that we need to be putting out to, the function that, we need to build this business case and really get everybody on board?
I think the answer is yes. Is that the challenge to propose to organizations? Obviously not all organizations are able to make a step change, right? Depending on their capital, depending on their position in the market, right? But for those who can, for those who have a leadership position and want to reinvent themselves, things like innovation teams, right? Or spinning off corporate innovation, maybe new businesses, or incubating, having an incubator within the organization that can start to build things that maybe compete internally on purpose, right? And it's for the purpose of survival for the next 5-10 years. Organizations that are doing that are finding new life and new opportunities. And going back to the channel conflict I mentioned, there is a way to coexist, right? But you have to test, and you gotta find the product market fit for the new solutions out there, and then find a way to merge, right, and bring things together. And it's better for both worlds. But we can't stick our head in the sand, right, and act like these changes aren't happening. But we can't maybe go all in either. It's got to be both somehow.
Fascinating. Thank you, Jason. Really interesting points. I think let's move on. And we touched on some of the hope, as you mentioned there, from the B2C background, from your perspective and what's possible across other industries. Let's talk a little bit more on this slide about how companies are adopting and changing for speed. Dave, if you wouldn't mind just going to dive into this one for us.
Yeah, and this resonates obviously. I mean, we hear a lot about automation, and we, sometimes it's kind of, it's easy to say and more difficult to actually do. But we from research that we conducted last year, it's called CPO Compass 2023, but it's a look ahead piece of research. You'll see there the data speaks for itself. So 9 out of 10 functions are looking to increase their use of data. 78.8% aim to increase the use of automation. So that's that tells its own story, which is reflected in the data in this report as well. So that process automation really needs to come through, and that helps with many things, not just speed. Obviously, it helps to remove people from laborious tasks and putting them onto higher value tasks, which is as much of a benefit to the speed and the increased velocity itself. Also, things like supplier rationalization, it may sound straightforward, just have fewer suppliers. So it's, but it's meaningful and worth focusing on as well. And I mentioned earlier this concept of team autonomy. And really, we see more and more procurement functions moving to kind of pod type structures where they really jump on business issues, and that helps with agility as well. So yeah, lots of ways that companies are looking to improve and move forward with their focus. Yeah, sorry, Jason. Thoughts?
Yeah, I just think about, again, putting it in the context of my lens of like incremental versus a step change. Process automation on its own, it's been around for forever, right? As long as we've existed. So I think it is worth diving deeper into what types of processes and what types of automation, and consider if the changes that are being explored are incremental, are going to yield incremental benefit or exponential. And thinking of Chat GPT, for example, right, within process automation, right, that is a step change. Chat GPT has the potential to lead to step change, exponential changes within automation, right? So that is a great example. But if we're not looking at investing in things like that, then are we being too safe, right? And are we not leaning into investing into more larger changes? So when I look at the other categories, supplier rationalization, team autonomy, multi-sourcing, again, I'm going to say it again, it just speaks to the shift to e-commerce and to e-commerce marketplaces in particular. There's a forecast out there by Forrester saying, B2B, global B2B spend is growing up to 18, almost 19 trillion by 2028. And right now it's about 6 trillion. So, roughly 13 trillion of spend, not new spend, right? The spend exists, but it's moving online, right? Yeah. That is a massive amount of spend that's moving online. And the reasons are things like, millennials and Gen Zs are now majority decision makers in 70-some% are purchasers, right? Making purchasing decisions. I think it's 33% are, actual decision makers, right? So it's a different era, right? Different type of buyer that have different expectations completely. And they're, I think it's 97% of that population are making purchases on marketplaces, right? So it's not surprising that these areas, are still a challenge point, but it also speaks to what's not on the screen is a shift to buying online and more types of specialized marketplaces popping up to solve that speed issue. And just think, I'll wrap up with this. Again, I'm not talking about, hey, everybody start buying on Amazon, right? What I'm saying is specialized companies that are market leaders in, say, steel manufacturing, for example, can leverage e-commerce, B2B marketplace technology and become the Amazon in their space.
Yeah.
And think of the benefits for a procurement organization that doesn't necessarily have to hire a sourcing team, right? 1 or 2 people, right, to source in that particular category. They can actually outsource that function to a marketplace where their entire company, right, is designed to specialize in sourcing best price, best quality of suppliers in the steel category, right? Just as an example. And having lots of those marketplaces at your disposal is multi-sourcing, right? It can offer more team autonomy and so forth. So that's kind of the future that we see, and more of a step change and increasing speed.
Fantastic. Well, maybe we had a question from the audience. Maybe it's worth just touching on this now because you both touched on aspects of it, which was actually around the hype of AI and of particularly Chat GPT being a silver bullet, for example, that will help us fix speed and productivity challenges. A question was asking, where's the best place to start? And maybe if we think about bottlenecks and causes delay, and how should we manage employee use when we think about AI? I mean, David, maybe just come to you for what the thoughts are with that one first, and Jason second.
Yeah, I mean, we know of various members within the community who are experimenting with Chat GPT, but it is very much experimentation stage at the minute. I mean, it's very low risk. It's it's sandbox stuff here that we're talking about. But you can check the technology at any number of things, at contract creation even, and just to see what happens. And then obviously, this is not for use today, but there's a lot of use cases. I mean, Jason, you may have come across more than myself.
I would love to say that I've become an expert, right? But I'm not yet. It's moving at very rapid clip, and every day I think I hear someone new saying that they're reached another level of ChatGPT. It's fascinating. There's a lot of hype, but the small use cases I've used personally, I can't deny, the amount of time savings that I've had myself, right? And it's quite interesting. So, to see that move into business, it's going to be fascinating. I think like AI as well, right? It's not going to be 100%, right? It's both. It's like AI and ChatGPT are going to work alongside of us and make it a lot better, a lot faster for us, right? But we still need to have oversight and make our own decisions. So.
Perfect. Yeah, complementary nature. Well, let's move on because I think we've thank you for the question from the audience, by the way, and for both of your answers. I think now we've spoken there about how companies are increasing speed, what the top strategies are for reducing those delays to procurement processes. Let's move over just for some examples here. Jason, you've got a couple, and then one from David as well. But talk to us a little bit about kind of customer success from one of your ecosystem, just to help kind of paint a picture of success here, what we can do.
Sure. Yeah. So real quick, this is a new marketplace that's popped up, and they're a B2B marketplace for Africa. And they, speaking of speed, and I'll just touch on a couple points here, not to read the full slide, but they went from concept to reality in not 8 weeks, right? It was more than that whenever they were forming their business, right? But whenever they started working with us, in only 8 weeks, they opened their doors, right, to start welcoming buyers and sellers in their own marketplace. And for an enterprise organization targeting, Fortune 500 type buyers, that's a great amount of speed, and allowed them to go from commercial concept to then actually commercializing it and selling it into the market in less than 10 weeks was great. And they've got buyers and sellers already, and they're doing all the implementation themselves. So that's been a fun story. And I think we have one more here we could just speak to as well. Different use case. This is an established leader in the procurement space. Outsourced procurement organization. They're working with very, very large buyers in lots of different industries, and they're offering, kind of the first quote there is from TradeShift, but talking about a lot of what we've spoken to already today. Procurement teams that are using maybe more traditional models and technologies are going to struggle to adapt fast enough, right, and remain agile. And organization here that we're working with has found a great winning recipe by combining both the classic managed procurement organization, right, and more technology around that, but also layering in marketplaces on top, and is giving their buyers the best of both worlds. Contracted supply, with known pricing for long term, but also access to curated, lots of supply that they can search and shop and browse and find. For them, it's offering more control, agility, and speed in the categories that they need. So again, this has been fun to watch, fun to be a part of, and it's nice seeing both types, new organizations, but also older and well-established organizations to find new ways to reach their customers and add value.
Great examples, and thank you very much for sharing. David, a slightly different angle from your perspective as we talk a little bit more about kind of the speed to onboarding case from one of our members. But a little bit of a insight here from our FMCG companies.
Yeah, and I mean, this isn't rocket science either, but it's amazing how often you hear of the length of time it takes, a large risk-averse multinational organization to bring in new suppliers. One of our members, actually, not this story, but one of our members speaking in Miami 2 or 3 months ago, was onboarding a ridiculous number of new suppliers, hundreds every month, just to meet the demand that they have in market. So if you're doing that over the course of 40 or 50 days, then that's not going to be good enough. But this particular company, it's a traditional process, but they're really looking to address the inefficiencies that are in that process. And to do so, they've broken it into a number of different challenges and really look at those different challenges. So the first way to do that, they're looking at mapping the processes themselves. So they're looking to understand those processes through value stream mapping and root cause analysis, as an example. Then they're really mobilizing a cross-functional, or they mobilize, sorry, I'm talking in future, in present, they've actually been through this already. So then they mobilized a cross-functional team. So engaging stakeholders to understand the challenges, project leaders, set up that team and really work on that initiative. So everybody's got buy-in to it. They held a number of internal and external workshops to bring in lead-in practice so that they could, ensure that from both the functional and the technological perspective that they are looking to, reach kind of upper quartile design for the project. Outside perspectives from others as well, from external consultants and peer companies to ensure everything was fit for purpose. And then just improving governance and policies. So, the cost-effective solutions to remove the need to completely on board in the first place, to similar to what Jason was saying. Should you actually have to do this at all, or can you just kind of have a different approach? And they've, through this, I mean, it's a good story. I could go into a lot of depth here, which I won't given time, but they've reduced that onboarding time from 40 days on average to 10 days, and that's a fundamentally impactful to not just P&L but also customer experience and supplier experience. So really good to see. They're looking to even cut this from 10 to 5 days in future. So the project isn't finished yet. But yeah, great story. They focused on it. They had ambitious goals and they went after it and have done very well.
Super. No, thanks for sharing. I think it's really good. Some really strong examples from you both there around about the purpose and the impact that high velocity can certainly have on our functions and driving us forward. So really, thank you both for leaning in on those. We are at the end of kind of the thoughts as a panel here. Before we now interest take some questions from the audience. So thank you very much for what's been provided. Let's take this in a few different directions. Maybe David, let's start with you. Just with one question that's come in to begin with. We're asked a little bit around metrics and what are the most important metrics for leaders to focus on to help their functions move at pace. And you spoke about the cross-functional aspect of that last case study. When we talk about metrics then for those leaders, anything in particular that you might recommend?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's an obvious one that we've just been talking about there in terms of, what is the average time it takes to onboard new suppliers, right? That's an easy one that you can get started with. You can track, you can, have ambitious goals around improving. Also, I mean, we do a lot of work with organizations on innovation and supporting supplier enabled innovation, and tracking the value of something like that is quite difficult. But you do have some organizations who are tracking things like number of ideas coming in, and how do you get those in a timely basis, and speed to market as well is something which people can track as well. So there's various ways of looking at this, but Jason, you must have more thoughts.
I was just going to add one more. I think price comparison, right? Oftentimes in procurement we have these long established contracts. And sometimes those prices per unit are actually not the best price, right? So having the ability to measure, a unit price in one seller A, versus a seller B, having access to that type of technology is really helpful to drive unit price savings.
Well, thank you for you both. Even follow up, David, you mentioned about the complexity of about some of the challenges that we face. Actually simplifying sometimes there's not rocket science, but our supply chains are becoming more and more complex. Jason, from your perspective, the question that's come in, I think, is what is the procurement role when it comes to managing that, the complexity whilst also maintaining procurement spend? Anything that you'd want to add here?
I mean, we're right in the middle of it, right? Driving the policies, deciding what we're going to remain firm on, and maintain control. I think the area of opportunity is finding the right technology partners. Could be marketplace, could be a new contracting tool, could be something else. Supplier vetting technology that can increase speed and maybe loosen up some control for the individuals on staff, within the procurement teams that are trying to do their best, right? But doing more with less people oftentimes leads to delays, right? So, procurement leaders are making these decisions, and, the decisions that are being made right now will significantly impact the organization internally and the future of that company.
David, maybe just in follow up to you, I think that we often get asked about and the question that has been asked here is about the balance between speed and risk management, and kind of manage your portfolio in such a way that allows that to be done in a timely way with investing in the right ways of the resources that you've got. What any recommendation from your perspective, what balance might look like here?
I mean, this is the question, right? And speed for the purpose of speed alone is not the approach that we need to take. It needs to be a balanced and rational approach based on both based on the the business itself. What market is it? Is it heavily regulated? Is it financial services? Is it pharmaceuticals? Right? I mean, that's very different to other industries that might not be quite as heavily regulated or operate in such kind of, in some cases, life critical sectors. But that balance is really important. And I think speaking to one insurance company, they were risk is our business, so that takes precedent. If we can shave off the edges, then great, but we're not going to introduce risk for the benefit of a bit more speed. So it really is industry specific. It has to be, procurement has to really support the overall strategy of the organization as well, and not just go after improvement for the sake of improvement.
Jason, do you want to add to that one?
I like what we keep saying around velocity versus speed, and I think of a sourcing, spend analysis that happens, right? And the results coming out of that spend analysis point to certain categories that you can optimize, right? So it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be faster in all categories, right? But find the ones that, I don't know, low-hanging fruit. You leaders are going to decide what the best strategy is, right? And let's say, some are going to be best to outsource to, BPOs, or maybe there's a group purchasing organization that can help bring savings. Maybe there's a marketplace that's already exists that already has a supply, so that you don't have to take your time to go find that seller, contract with them, get a price, right? Price is already there. Competition is driving best price, right? So looking at all the options now, based on that spend analysis, for example, can lead to speed, and velocity in the right ways, in the right areas.
Thank you to both of them. Jason, maybe just touching on kind of the aspects you to go a little bit further into the marketplace piece. One of the questions that we've had in talks about, can marketplace sellers really be trusted? Interesting comment. I don't know what your thoughts are on that one.
Depending on folks' background, they a lot of folks may associate marketplace with eBay, like the online yard sale or Craigslist or things of that sort. I know Alibaba has had a lot of challenges in their brand and the quality of supply, and small to medium-sized businesses, manufacturing and stuff. So there's a lot of challenges and debate in that area. So I think it's a worthy question for whoever asked that. I would say it depends is the answer, right? It depends on the marketplace. It depends on, the marketplace and their approach to supplier sourcing, right? Are the marketplaces sourcing and curating and filtering out, the sellers that shouldn't be there? Oftentimes it depends on the life cycle stage of the marketplace. If it's an early marketplace, they may be focusing on, a small few and the right few, right? And then later stage, they're going to, open up the floodgates and allow anyone and everyone to come on just to, add to the top line. So you got to pick your partner, right? And so it does depend. I would say for the right operators, right, that are focusing on particular industries, particular categories, it's in their best interest to not, muddy the waters, to have, bad supply in there. There's great technology out there that can help do background checks and financial checks and things of that sort. It does get more difficult as you scale. So there always needs to be an infrastructure in place to keep the wrong suppliers out.
Great.
Sorry, David, add to that, because I mean, I think it is an interesting area of to dig into. And in some instances, it could introduce another layer of, sort of like complexity when trying to understand what it is you're buying. But I was at a supplier event, a corporate event that was for suppliers. And one of the sessions was on counterfeit. And it was an industry which was very, very vulnerable to, a high-tech, manufacturer that literally, if something was to go wrong, then people would die, right? So they can't afford for counterfeit goods to come in. And there was an instance where, a tiny component of some, I don't know what tier it was, but it was one of the tiers, introducing a counterfeit component into the assembly line, which failed and had an impact, and there was legal implications to that. But the takeaway was that in an age of scarcity as well, when there's sometimes things are hard to find in some cases, that introduces another level of risk. And I wonder, Jason, you might have a view on this. If you choose your partners wisely, then they will be doing a lot of the due diligence as well, because their livelihoods depend on it, right?
Yeah. Simple answer is one would hope, right? I don't think it's straightforward, right? I mean, at the end of the day, the right answer is everyone needs to be checking. However, reality says that sometimes that doesn't happen, right? And I think that's where the gaps are, right? And so having technology layers to help when human behavior makes a mistake, right, is very necessary. Having multiple layers in the contracts of liability and coverage is important. I think the answer to reduce the most risk is all of the above. And unfortunately, there's going to be, accidents or issues that come up. I think, my message, and maybe the example that you shared is not best suited for marketplaces, since I've been talking about that today, right? Maybe the risk is too high, right? That's where, strategic sourcing activity is the right decision. Don't outsource that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that comes back to the comment earlier about that balance between speed and risk management as well, and kind of adopting the right processes that are going to be for your own procurement function, without a doubt. Just one last point on the marketplaces piece, because it's interesting to get your take on. Someone's asked us about how can a buyer increase agility by using a marketplace? The agility word is an interesting one in this context of speed and velocity as well, just to add into the mix. But any thoughts from you there?
Yeah, so some of this is future forecasting, right? And my perspective on this particular type of question, which I get quite a bit, in the future, and we see this in B2C, so it is happening in B2B, but it needs time to mature, where specialist marketplaces are coming up, right? Where a marketplace in a particular category that buyers have been sourcing themselves can now look to a marketplace and say, I'm going to source metals or, fabrics or whatever it may be that I need from a marketplace that specializes in that category, in that particular geography, can absolutely lead to agility, right? And the area that I like to compare is currently today, you may have a team in-house that you've hired, you've trained, you've insured, the cost of all of that, right? To source, for a particular category, right? But at the end of the day, it might still be only 2 or 3, maybe 5 people that are doing that role. Whereas a marketplace specializing in that same category might have 2, 5, 10, 100 people sourcing, all over the globe. And their entire business model is to find the right supply at the right place at the right time. Right. And so for a buyer to say, well, I'm going to partner with this marketplace that's sourcing the right supply. And if they don't have it, pick up the phone and talk to them, right? They're a partner now. And they have the team, the infrastructure to bring that supply for you, and they benefit from that. It's a different approach, right? It's not happening at large today, okay, but it is shifting in that direction as more and more specialized marketplaces are coming up. And I just think the agility, cost savings, and the operational savings of being able to look to these marketplaces, on demand, right, is just faster and easier than having to hire, source, train, insure, and retain an in-house procurement team. Not that team is going to go away. I'm saying that team that exists in-house is going to shift to focus more on the right categories, the right strategic things and strategic activities, and less tactical. Move all that tactical into the marketplace.
No, thanks, Jason. I'm conscious of time as we're unfortunately almost at the end of a really good conversation that I think it's just has flown along. So, David, maybe we'll just come to you. Just I said no, nicely flows from Jason's comment there, really about kind of the team perspective. But one of the last question we've had in is actually more about talent remaining one of the biggest concerns for leaders, especially when it comes to skills gaps. What should we be looking to overcome to help remove latency from procurement?
I mean, it's a tricky question, isn't it? I mean, but being familiar and comfortable with data and data mine, that.
We lost David there just for a moment. While we get him back, maybe Jason, any thoughts from you?
Can you repeat the question? I'm a little distracted.
Yeah, no, sure. So it's around delays, often one of the biggest concerns, for our leaders, very much being around having to overcome the different skills gaps that we have. So anything around those skills gaps, how we remove that latency from procurement as a result.
Yeah, I think David is best suited to answer it in the most roundabout and most direct way.
So I'm back now.
He's back. Here we go.
We lost you for a moment at the pivotal moment.
It was
around talent, how we remove latency.
Well, I was saying that it's difficult, but having access and comfort with data analysis and interrogating data is something which I think is really important. But I also think this kind of relationship aspect, which doesn't sound quite linked, but being able to influence quickly, get decisions quickly, work internally and externally at speed, at pace, presenting your business case with data, so data based business cases, so that you can move quickly without reams and reams of debate and feedback, I think is important. So you could pick any number of capabilities that do with work, but I think those two jump out at me.
Fantastic. We are unfortunately at the end of our conversation and time for this week. Really appreciate you both giving us the last hour to have a discussion around those barriers to high velocity procurement. Hugely appreciated to you both. We are going to ask you for feedback. Please do let us know your feedback on this conversation, any other areas that you'd like us to potentially dive into in the future. A huge thank you to both Jason and to David, and of course to Tradeshift for partnering with us on this report as well. The report will be live to our members from the 5th of June. So this is a teaser to get you all excited for that particular report coming live in just over a month's time. And for those of you non-members, there'll also be a lighter version of the report coming out later into the summer, so watch out for more details on the release of that one. But big thank you to David and Jason and to Tradeshift again for partnering us on this particular piece of research. But we look forward to speaking with everybody again soon, and goodbye for now.